Yes.
Yep.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of the Future of Contingent Workforce Buyers Edition. Today, we have some of the best industry leaders in contingent labor who are going to give us their insights for 2024 and, of course, make some predictions. In 2023, we discussed the concept of rolling recession, with the unemployment rate largely staying the same because of market forces, which included Fed rate increases, congressional spending, which is counter the Fed rate increases, the reduction of immigration, the trends towards onshoring and nearshoring, as well as retirement outpacing new talent in the workforce. All this makes it very difficult to reduce wage inflation caused by basic supply and demand. In 2024, we're seeing that those market forces are still there. The Fed has decided not to decrease the interest rate for the time being. We are still seeing some slowdown in contingent labor staffing, and there's 17 worldwide presidential elections. So it's a very complicated world at the very least. I'm excited to have our panelists today. We have Jen Ko, head of contingent labor at Lam Research, Fayez Nathu, global talent acquisition leader for Marsh McLennan, Keisha Stevens, director of people operations at Splunk, and Nicholas Wennerstorm, director of human resources at Polyclip Systems. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess start off with, what are your predictions for 2024? Faiz, you want to start?
Oh my, the hot seat already. Thank you, Ashish. Look, I think in terms of contingent workforce, I guess that's where you're directing the question to. Yes. Predictions. I don't see it being significantly different than previous years, except we have new technologies at hand, right? And I think there'll be a decent segue into our conversation later on. But the introduction of AI and how firms are using that, how staffing firms, recruiting firms are going to leverage or harness the power of AI, and can they do it well? Can they do it correctly? Will it benefit the contractors as much as it could benefit the end clients? So that's one. And I think there'll be, depending on which industry you're in, I think there'll be an increased usage or an increase in freelance ICs, for example, in 24. And one of the reasons I say that is because people like the flexibility of their work. There's new legislations going in. And I'm keeping this to the U.S. as far as the freelancers ICs go. And I think there'll be similar usage of contractors and temp labor as we've seen in the last several years. You've noted previously that unemployment is low, so that leaves room for, I think, increased usage of contractors where we've stabilized on the perm side. The big job hopping of several years ago during the pandemic, I think that's stabilized now, and firms are getting a better handle of what their full-time roles look like and are looking to supplement where they can with temporary labor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you kind of feel like it's going to be flat, but there's not going to be growth at the very least.
I don't see growth necessarily. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that there isn't change happening within the space, right? I think you'll see some hopping around. You'll see, contractor usage go up and down, ebb and flow. But overall, I think it'll remain a little on the flat side. If there is growth, I don't think it'd be a significant growth.
Yeah. Keisha, what are your thoughts?
So I'm with Fayez on the growth or stability of where we are now, but I think it could change and ebb and flow from emerging markets. So places where perhaps we were hiring more in last year could change into this next year, and for all different reasons, right? Companies are focused on areas of growth in those emerging markets. I think contractors naturally follow when companies decide to strategically move to a different market. There's also the economy, costs, et cetera, that add to that. So I think that's one of the big things we will continue to follow. And I think what that means for CW leaders is we've got to rely more on freelance platforms. We've got to rely more on employer of record, global employer of record companies, and finding the right ones, because they're not all the same. And, that's another challenge for us if we haven't been doing that, right? So I definitely think that's one that's going to continue to grow in 2024. The other thing I want to double down on is multi-generational workforce. So, we have, 3 or 4 in the workforce now. I actually experience this myself on my own teams. And I can tell you that how they learn, how they want to work, how they hear the messaging that you're saying is different. So it's become very important for us to be able to educate hiring managers on how to manage this workforce, not just contingent. I mean, just the different generations, and how to message and communicate and ensure that they're working the way that they want to work, so that you can get the most productivity. So that is definitely a challenge, I think, that a lot of us don't focus on until you're in that spot. And then suddenly you're like, oh, wow, only half the team heard what I said or understood what I meant, right? And so I think that's definitely going to continue on. And also compliance. So in California, we've got CalPay. That has definitely caused my CW team to spend a lot of time and collaboration to get responses to these different regulations that are coming out. And it's a collaboration across the company. So it's compliance, it's HR, it's legal, it's our suppliers. So suddenly my team is spending a lot of time doing that. And I wouldn't say that that was always the case, that it would be something that would fall into the CW leader or team's time. And that I've definitely seen a twist in. I don't think that's changing, especially going into the next year.
100%. I think the regulatory environment seems like it's not fully thought through or vetted out, because I think a lot of the laws contradict each other at this point, and it does seem like it's an attack on the industry itself. But I agree with you 100%. Nick, what are your thoughts for CW for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of regulatory environments and what's being perceived, at least, as an attack on the environment and the industry, was last year in my home state of Illinois, the day and Temporary Labor Services Act was updated, that called for temporary employees to receive equal pay and equivalent benefits after working at a client site for 90 days in a 12-month period. This was actually challenged in federal court by the American Staffing Association, the Staffing Services Association of Illinois, and 3 other staffing firms. Interestingly enough, though, the lawsuit does not challenge the equal wages requirement, but rather cites that the federal government is the one who's the sole regulator for benefits. And in the lawsuit, it's really interesting. They cited that staffing firms have already lost business as a result of the regulation. One staffing firm's revenue is down 8% compared to the same period last year, and 5 clients have stopped using the firm altogether, accounting for 100 employees. And in addition, 3 clients have transitioned to full-time employees or restricted assignments to less than 90 days. So I think this law, which will see the light of day, will shatter the contingent workspace into a million pieces, at least in the Prairie State. I can tell you from my own professional experience, when I worked in the temp industry, clients would come to us and say, we want you to bring in all the temps at a lower wage than our full-time employees who were making a higher wage doing the same work, as an incentive to do a good job. And then when we bring them on full-time, we'll pay them the same or maybe even more as the full-time worker. So I think this speaks not only to equal wages for equal work, but it's also, for all those hobbyists out there that like to talk about co-employment, it shrinks that gap even further, in my opinion, to the point now where you may as well just hire full-time employees and not temps. Or what some companies may do in following the law is just simply restrict assignments to 89 days. But I think this is important, though, from a social aspect as well, because I've seen this adversely affect largely production environments. Black and brown employees in particular are adversely affected by this, being forced to work undesirable shifts for less money than the people standing next to them doing the same work. So I think this law is great, and I hope that it sees the light of day sooner rather than later.
You don't think there's going to be a backlash in terms of with all the changes happening, that you're going to essentially force offshore movement for the non-LI type of jobs?
Probably for the non-allied jobs, but I see this really being targeted more at light industrial and distribution. At least where I live in Lake County, Illinois, there's a distribution center and warehouse on every corner where I drive. So this can only be a good thing, I think, for employees, and a bad thing for staffing companies.
Yeah. So we've seen the CW spend has gone down this year, roughly around 8%, I think is the number, but that keeps changing every month. So who knows where it lands up at the end of the year, but are companies doing less work, or is it being moved to SOW, or are we being over optimistic about what's happening right now? Or is it going offshore? What are your thoughts?
I can start. So for us, it's definitely was strategic movement. So we thought about other locations that we wanted to open. So some of our US business slowed down, but we picked up in other areas like Costa Rica, India, Poland, for example. So that was a strategic move on our part for emerging markets. So our US business dropped, but it didn't necessarily go away. It just moved to another area. So for us, that was a business choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Keisha on that as well. We've seen a slight decrease in our U.S. Canada job requisitions on the temp front, but we've seen a huge increase offshore, in particular with India. Again, temp labor, but we also do a lot of SOW managed work out there as well on SOWs with our partners. Our tech partners. So there's an increase there. I think it's more of a, now the eyes are there, right? We've always offshored work to a certain degree to lower cost locations. But I think now, at least from our perspective, we're bringing in more contractors there in India and our Latin America countries as well, including Eastern Europe. Was previously Eastern Europe, places like Poland and the like.
Yeah. I wonder if some of the catalyst is from the fact that we're all working from home. So now you can basically work from anywhere. So then why not do it somewhere else? Cheaper.
Yeah.
Ish. I think when you're looking at a global program, right, if you're a global firm and you're looking where to position it, it's not so much the fact that we're able to work remote that does it. It's the whole infrastructure is there.
Yeah.
Right? So they're leveraging that. But that's a great point you make, Ashish, on working remotely. That's one of the other changes, I think, for 2024, more so than before, is workers or contractors in the U.S. want that flexibility, right? Yeah. So as long as you're within compliance, because you don't want to be creating a tax presence inadvertently in locations you're not supposed to be in. But assuming all that part is correct, then contractors want that flexibility of working remotely. And that can only benefit firms.
Yeah.
Really, because you then have access to a wider berth of workers in different locations. You can take advantage of potentially lower cost.
Mm-hmm.
So remote working.
Keisha, what are your thoughts on remote working?
So we're a hybrid company. So we've probably worked remote a lot prior to even COVID. So not too much from that aspect has changed for us. I think we think about when we're bringing teams in to have meetings, to ask them to come in once a month, different things like let's be meaningful about whatever those collaborations are. Let's, bring people together for the right reasons, not just to see butts and seats, right? So that's really kind of what we're seeing out of the Bay Area for our company. But everywhere is a little bit different. I mean, I definitely hear the struggles of people being asked to come back in office full time. I think what maybe employers forget is during this time, a lot of people, I have a team with a lot of children in parents. So they've changed the way that they have their children taken care of. It's not like we're dropping them off at daycare for 5 days a week. It might only be 2 or 3 days and the kids are home with the parents. I mean, we are asking them to change how they have adjusted their lifestyles. And I think that's a lot. And a lot of employers, I'm not sure, are considering all those pieces yet.
That's a good point. It's funny. I have a client that has been trying to get the people back in the office, and they've tried a lot of different strategies. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a lot of it's around daycare and and the ability of flexibility.
Yeah.
And if you don't solve those two problems, you're not getting people back in the office, because just saying you need to come just to come doesn't really make a value proposition.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, when I was running a program years ago, I heard the client sponsor say to a fairly large supplier, "Working from home isn't a replacement for daycare," which I really found to be a sinister and despicable comment. You know, I think you've got new generations now that have changing values, new values on what they think is right and wrong and what their preferences are. And FaceTime and wearing dressy clothes and uncomfortable shoes and marching into a stale office isn't fun anymore. You know, also too, you know, when you hear this idea that like, quote, people don't want to work, they just don't want to work for you, is what you're concluding. And I have an 11 and an 8-year-old. They'd rather be influencers now on YouTube and Instagram rather than being a corporate hack. They've seen their father get laid off multiple times since they've been alive. They've seen their grandfather get laid off. The the belief and the trust of certainty within corporate America and the workplace has simply been eroded. You know, it was said years ago that millennials won't work for a company for 30 years and get a gold watch. The reality now, fast forward to 2024, companies won't have you that long. And by the way, that watch was gold plated. So people just have a different idea now of what work is, and it's not standing behind a register at a theme park when you're 15, like I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other part of it is the work from home. At least for me, and I think a lot of people I know, there's not a clear delineation from your home and your work, so you end up working more hours and you save some time commuting. So you apply that to work. So I think if you're responsible, productivity actually goes up.
Mm-hmm. I can actually quote you, Ash. I remember you said this to me and our closest friends in 2020. You said someone had told you, "I used to work from home, now I live at work," and it's true, right? But if the idea is to just see, I also think to return to office. The underpinning of that is that corporations have leases and mortgages on these glass and steel buildings that they don't want to divest because it's an asset. So they're going to make use of it. That's, I believe, one of the reasons why. Because real estate is your top expense in any organization outside of your labor, right? So
Yeah.
you're going to make use of it. And of course, you can't divest your real estate as easy as you can your employees.
But there's also a tax benefit too, right? If you bring people into the office, the cities are giving you tax breaks, and so there's also this incentive on that side as well.
Yeah.
Use that.
Yeah, the theory behind that, Ash, is that the more people that are in the city, the more they're going to make or avail themselves of the services industry that used to cater to them, the delis.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem. Yeah.
Dry cleaning, etc. So there was a huge ecosystem built around going into the office, which is withering away now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So where are the cost savings then? If we've already cut back, we've reduced rates, we're moving things in other directions, what else is there that you've found that's kind of a priority this year from a cost saving standpoint?
I mean, rather than focusing on manufactured markups and bill rate caps and then spending the excess on your consultants, not in the VMS, why not focus on the savings of your utilities and the commute for your employees having to come into the office 5 days a week?
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Brian Pena had said this publicly at an SIA conference. He says, you know, all these staffing companies say we can save you 10, 40, 60%. After a while, you wonder why it's not free. I mean, that is the discussion of cost savings is a bottomless conversation. And I think it's built that way for a reason.
Yeah, there's other ways of looking at cost savings than just, can I save X percent off the margin or on giving the contractor that haircut on their pay rate, right? There's much more efficiencies now that are available to to not just the enterprise, but to the workers and to the staffing agencies, right? And those costs can be passed off to the end client. And Ashish, I'm going to create another opportunity for you to segue the use of AI again, right? I think all roads right now will lead there. Look, you can leverage AI to make your outfit, your operations, whether you're a staffing firm or an enterprise, to create much more efficiencies and get rid of some of the mundane work that workers are doing and refocus them, right? Doesn't mean you have to get rid of a recruiter, but that means you can refocus the person who's doing operations for compliance into doing far more work. So you may not need 5 people to do it. In the course of a year, you'll go down to 4.5, or maybe even 4. But there's efficiencies that can be engaged or gained by really leveraging some of the technology that's out there.
It's funny you say that, and I agree with you. I think the AI piece, like some people are really scared of it. And I think at least Gen 1 AI is going to end up being a better assistant for you to help make you more productive. I don't think it's going to replace you.
No, I don't. And that's the thing, right? I think it'll be a better assistant. So your interview scheduling, your document, your contract generation, all of that stuff, I think can be passed off smartly to AI. It can enable your recruiters to work more efficiently in being able to create a larger pipeline, for example, right? Instead of whittling down like we did with the ATSs using buzzwords, you leverage AI to use buzz phrases, right? Where instead of using the term, just as an example, strong leadership, which has its own unconscious bias thrown in there, but where you can throw phrases like led a team of 12 people or manage a team of 12 people to do A, B, and C. That's an example of strong leadership right there, but I didn't use that buzzword.
Yeah.
In the old days, I would have been excluded because I didn't use that word, but you can leverage AI to say, hey, look, think about the phrase holistically.
Yeah.
Another example I thought was in search of a bilingual candidate. Okay. But if I list English, French, German, Italian on my resume, but I didn't use the word bilingual, I'd get excluded.
That's true.
Right? So using AI to say, hey, this person knows 4 languages. Asset, right? There's smarter ways of doing things and smarter ways of using AI, I would think.
Absolutely.
I
Keisha, what are
wanna
your...
I want to throw down the age-old workforce planning that I think a lot of companies still don't do well. If we really sit down and look at these roles and should they really be a contractor, a long-term contractor, short-term, or do we need to go back and build a case to get that headcount? And it's not an easy task. It's not an easy discussion. It's not a one person decision. It takes time. But when we sit down and we do it right, I think that ends up in efficiency and eventually cost savings. But it's something that we all have to tackle together. It's not one of those conversations that just comes from CW. You got to have the HRBP in the room, finance in the room, the business behind it, and obviously the headcount giver, right? So you need to make sure everybody's on board with it. But I think that we've all been told no so many times in our companies about changing headcount that people often give up on that, right? And they just continue this string where we could be being more efficient and saving costs if we make some of these decisions up front as part of our workforce planning. So I'm going to throw that one down as something we should never forget about, even though it's the one that we probably hate tackling because it is difficult. It's not an easy collaboration.
Absolutely. I love that. Jen, what are your thoughts around, we were talking about cost savings and also how you're expecting AI to change the way work is done or even being implemented this year?
I think cost savings, you really have to have a good foundation. So when you're looking at it, you need to have kind of that risk mitigation. You've got to have good partners in place before you really find cost savings. Those will come kind of holistically. When it comes to AI, I'm super excited about it, but I think with it being so new, I just echo kind of the experts in the fields in saying that the concerns lie in how they're creating, and training the deep learning and the the different systems and data sets that they're training these on. So as those evolve, ensuring that the systems that you partner with enhance rather than detract from that diversity and inclusion is going to be important. And so how we use it right now, we're kind of from a contingent workforce program standpoint, we're on a wait and see. I'm in the middle of the building right now, so we're but I'm excited for the future. I think there's a lot of different uses. It's just making sure it's done responsibly.
Interesting. And Nick, what are your thoughts?
I think AI is particularly valuable in a forever broken recruitment process. It's forever broken because of the people and the biases that are involved in it. The more I saw, I won't name it simply because I don't remember, but I saw in my LinkedIn feed, there's an avatar AI person created who will actually do sourcing interviews with your candidates. I love that. Right. I think that the recruiter has desperately tried to be strategic over the last 20 years, so much that they put strategic in their title. Yet at the end of the day, it's very much a customer service role, and one that services their hiring manager and not the job seeker. I think AI can absolutely augment the recruitment process to where it better serves the job seeker so that they're getting real-time feedback on their candidacy rather than simply looking on ZipRecruiter and finding out the job they interviewed 6 times for is no longer posted.
What about, are any of you guys looking at it from a vendor perspective or even internally from a compliance perspective where you can use it to sort of make sure that you're compliant and with all the regulatory changes happening that are up to date and the system kind of captures that to make sure that we look back and become compliant if something's changed in the last year?
I think that'd be a fantastic use of it, keeping you up to date on any changing legislation, regulations, especially at a global perspective.
Yeah.
I think taking one step back from that, Ashish, is like ensuring that whatever vendor that we're reviewing for these AI things, that we have the right team in place to review them. Yeah. So, it shouldn't just be the contingent workforce manager. IT involved is, security involved, IT security, all of those folks. And I think companies need to make sure they have that little team together for those reviews to ensure that we are picking the right vendors. Everything is so new, and it's hard to find a vendor that is, proven right now in everything because it is so new. So I think that companies need to step back and think about, all right, if we're going to engage with this kind of vendor, who's going to be on that committee, if you will, that can help us ensure that we're choosing the right vendor for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see AI really bring more of the contingent work into the VMS. At least my own personal experience, so much work from the PMO is done outside the VMS, whether that's following up on candidates, compliance, onboarding. The entire rec to check process oftentimes is done outside the VMS. So I look forward to Dan Cabral personally spearheading that at Beeline, and I know he'll do it.
And offboarding, honestly, like how many people have gotten taken off projects, but they still have access to systems?
Thank you.
I think that's a big one, right?
Well, I've accidentally closed people and then they get shut out of the building. That's happened to me more than anything.
Well, that means your systems are working properly.
Yeah. But that human intervention is what made that person stand out in the cold.
Maybe helping direct the managers to the right kind of worker, right? So almost that like decision wizard, but actual wizard. Do you do full time? Do you take it to a contractor, consultant, temporary worker? Which way? And helping kind of route somebody to the right type for the need, I think would be an interesting use as well.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. From a vendor perspective, what are you looking for your vendors to use AI for?
Not call me all day. No, I don't know.
It's like we said earlier tonight, and right during this presentation, I had to hang up on 3 vendor calls.
See, I thought I was being rude. I'm so glad you just said that.
I had to decline. So if anyone is listening and you're the one calling, stop it. I think it's, as I said earlier on, with AI, there's some dangers as well, right? There's regulations in place or in many of the states on how recruitment. And they fall particularly on the perm side, but I think the caution applies to contingent workers as well. On how are you going to use that AI to find the candidates or deselect candidates? I think AI is great and able to grow the pipeline, reach a further afield, as we were saying, in combination with remote working. But if you're looking for a diverse pool of workers in the contingent space, that typically suffers because the whole point of contingent workers is I get them today, tomorrow, right? Really fast.
Yeah.
In the perm space, I can take my time to find the best qualified, diverse candidate, right? Worker. In the contingent space, I may not have that luxury, but the recruiting firms do. And they have that luxury and able to build up the pipeline or a slew of candidates constantly, that the recruiters don't have to do it because they may not have time, but their AI does.
Yeah.
Right. Build out that pipeline. And when a client is looking for a diverse slate of potential candidates or potential workers, it's almost readily available.
True.
Right. The AI can look for people in places the recruiter may not have thought. Right. It could parse LinkedIn with other types of criteria. It can parse a lot of the colleges who have on campus or on site job fairs or what have you. I think it's smartly using AI within the confines of the rules and being transparent about it. I think the transparency part is critical because we can't engage with firms who are going to be critical or biased in their search, right? We just don't want to deal with that. But equally, I get the speed to market is going to be critical.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's going to be some inherent bias in AI because if I use it to do recruiting, systems are taught to get to the fastest result as quick as they can. So they're always going to keep picking the same candidate that goes through, right? But the other thing that resonated from what you're saying is you want vendors to use AI to become more efficient, but make sure they're regulatory compliant around that and to be careful, and also not to use it to do sales calls.
Yes. Although the sales call, I think, is just inherently the nature of sales, those cold calls.
It's hard for them. I understand.
It's really hard, yeah.
Agency background. I think it'd be interesting for agencies and different vendors to use it for the reutilization of their workforce. So instead of, engaging and doing all that recruiting efforts to place one person once, really scheduling, looking who's coming off, looking at your client suite, who's got similar scopes, right? And being able to reallocate that workforce in a meaningful manner, not only for the worker themselves, but for the clients. You've got somebody coming off, there's tenure here, there's breaks in service there. Is it a like skill, or is it something that somebody can grow into the next role with a different client? So really kind of using recruiting dollars to keep their workers and create that value for that person.
Yeah, we had one vendor who did that in the call center space, where we had a need for call center from was August to December, and they had another client in a different part of the country that needed people from April to July, April to August type of thing. And they built out their pipeline that way, right? So they knew this contract is this long, they knew the next contract is this long, and they used, at the time, I don't think they were using AI, they were manually doing it, but exactly what you're saying, Jen, is you can help both your clients and the contractor have a steady stream of work without having the effort of having to go and re-recruit people.
Right. The heart of it is around the person. It's a disruption when they move from role to role or company to company. You're losing benefits. You have to re-qualify. So it would, I think, make for a more stable workforce within this space.
Yeah.
Yep. I love that idea, Jim, because I've seen that from a branch side try to happen in the past without AI. And it always stopped or failed because that recruiter who was ever in charge of that always got pulled into the revenue generating client that needed help. So that idea always kind of went by the wayside. It happened for like 4 or 6 months, and then it was like, we've got to pull that recruiter. And with the use of AI, that wouldn't be an issue. So I actually really love that idea.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And I've kind of been pushing, and so you're kind of walking us to the next topic, actually, was candidate reusability. I think is a huge aspect of this. And I think there's a lot of talk around direct sourcing, and I've seen a few programs that have actually done it well, but the majority of them haven't had the success or really taken over the footprint that it is. So is there a disconnect between the direct sourcing marketing that's happening with all the discussions that are going on versus the success of it? And are we really looking at the right problem? Because I think if you could increase candidate reusability, one, it's ESG, it's good for ESG because you're not going to reissue key cards, computers, you're getting more efficiency. People who are working on a project, if they get extended or redeployed to another project in the same client, has a lot of internal company knowledge. They're going to be productive much faster. So what are your thoughts around direct sourcing so far in your experiences? And what do you think of that versus like a candidate reusability approach using AI?
I don't have the luxury right now of kind of looking into that direct sourcing. It's again, I'm in implementation. We're really building out the program here, so it's an interesting concept. I just haven't really seen anyone do it super well just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite topics, honestly. So I'll just throw it out there. It can work. It can work if you have highly repeatable, high volume roles that are coming in, you have that total funnel and you have a great brand. It can work. But when you have many, many different types of roles, it's kind of onesie, twosie. I mean, we use ours more as a cost saving lever. It is a lever I use within my program. It will never be 80% of my contractors coming in. It will never replace my suppliers. It is really an additional lever that I use. But I think we also don't have that kind of volume in similar roles to really get that going. We have a great brand, and we definitely have people that come in through the direct sourcing module. And every time we post, that's all great. But they're onesie, twosie roles. So we don't get that same kind of momentum as someone who has those highly repeatable, high volume roles. So for us, it's a lever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I implemented it twice and it was an absolute failure, but it wasn't my fault in any way. I will not take ownership. The reason it's a failure is because, one, no matter what anyone says, and I know that we're all passionate about this, at the highest levels of a large corporation, contingent labor is not a priority. I'm sorry to say that to everyone listening. Total downer today. And also, too, you're taking the same volume of business for a staffing company and just reducing the markup, but expecting them to dedicate a full recruiting team to give you the same level of service. And so then both the VMS and the MSP are let down by the fact that now they're making less money on the same business that they had yesterday. So it's cute to talk about. I do know of one company here in the Chicago area that called it self-sourcing many years ago. They hired a temp and they used their own brand to bring people in. I also think direct sourcing works really well for alumni pools, especially as the retiree rate goes up and we want to capture that skill set. Allstate is a good example, who still has a retiree program, an alumni pool during catastrophes to bring back claims people. But other than that, it's now as much of a buzzword as big data, predictive analytics, diversity, and now AI. I don't think people really know what they're selling.
I mean, one of the things you kind of implied was that it was mispriced, and that's why it's not working.
Well, I mean, the whole idea, right, was that we're bringing back known talent. Why pay, just as an example, why pay, I'll just use higher talent. Why would I pay you for the same price to redeploy a worker that's already been at my client, that has been at my site, right? That's always been the idea. We're recycling candidates at a lower price. I mean, if we're talking about cost savings, that was the leading motivation behind it.
Yeah, I don't consider that direct sourcing, right? That's just recycling a pre-identified or a boomerang hire. On the direct sourcing, yeah, I'm with Keisha on this one, and was never really interested in it because I saw too many glaring holes both on the compliance and regulatory side, and then just it got overhyped and talked, but without much substance on it. So I think this topic's been going on for several years now. Having said that, organically, in my UK program, we use an element of direct sourcing, and that's because my MSP is able to offer that as part of the service. They have a branch where they are, in-house recruiters been able to do that, and we use them for very specific niche type of roles, Keisha, right? Where the volume is not an issue, where you have as in where it's not low volume, but it's repeatable, where they need a pipeline, constant pipeline through the year. I think it works fine there, right? So call center work, for example, or claims administration. You need a pipeline throughout the entire year. You need a team of 30 to 40 or whatever number it is. In that case, it works. And I think I was talking to somebody a few years ago who was trying to sell the benefits of how much cost savings they made. But what they didn't go around telling everybody is that it was limited to only IT roles that was already offshored on a nearshore location. And the team was based in that same city to do the direct hiring. So there's just so many caveats around it that when you dug deeper into it, made no sense for it to be part of my program.
Yeah.
Right. So there are limitations, which I don't think all the suppliers tell you about up front.
I mean, I think there are some niche values to it. To me, we've taken something that usually you have one vendor do, and you split it into like a curator, a payroll person, another system that's got to replicate with your VMS, that's got to replicate with your finance system. So we've kind of overcomplicated it, and then I also kind of mispriced it. So I think it's essentially master service with additional systems and emails, and we've counted it to a point where the providers end up losing money on it.
And it becomes overly complicated, like you just said, because they sit next to it. There's a whole concept of curation, and then that in itself poses huge questions to me as to how they're curating, and if they're going to throw in AI in that curating, and they need to be fast and speed to market. How many corners are you cutting there? And am I getting the appropriate type of candidate at this point? Or are you just throwing names and resumes at the wall, hoping something will stick really quickly? Right? I see huge amount of quality issues there inherently built up. And before anybody or any supplier says, no, we want to sell you on a different model, and just stop, don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to hear it.
And then it's the other thing Keisha said was right. She was like, if you're Splunk, then everyone knows you're going to apply for the job. But if you're Joe's Hardware, then you can put up a direct sourcing website, but no one's going to. Right? So you're not getting through.
Yeah.
In terms of the regulatory environment, it does seem, and we kind of mentioned this a few times in passing, that they're making the ability to hire temp talent very complicated, and I think it's a process that really hasn't been thought through. And so, given that regulatory environment seems to be rapidly changing, some things I think are good, but then there's some things that are probably contrary to what the gig economy worker is looking for. And then number two is sometimes you make a policy to protect the person you want to protect, and you actually make them more vulnerable. And an example I'll give you is in New York City, we increased the minimum wage to a point where it was too expensive for companies. So they said, all right, we're going to automate some things. And so a store across the street they shut down for 3 months and replaced 20 workers with iPads and brought 4 workers back at the higher rate. But then you have 16 people that no longer have jobs. And so there's things like that to consider. But given that it's making it really complicated for you guys to actually run a program, right? So is that sort of forcing behavior where you're saying, okay, let's move jobs to other locations because of this? Or how do you navigate it?
I think for us, we're leaning in. I mean, to be clear, I don't hate some of the transparency that some of this is forcing. As some of it has been needed for a long time, and it's the right thing to do. I think that for my team that is supporting these things and the collaboration that we have to do with other enterprise groups within the company, it does add a level of complexity. All of these things need a PM assigned, for example, so that we can make sure we're collecting everything from everyone. There's a different level of collaboration that's needed with those suppliers, and a level of trust with the suppliers as well, that they are, providing us the correct information that we will ultimately be providing, right, to whatever body is asking for this information. So I think it adds a level of complexity. I think the other thing is that some of these laws that are coming out are not super clear day one. So we're 60 days in, and then there's a new update to it. Then we're 90 days in, and there's another update, or the date's been moved, And so I think that has been almost a little bit more frustrating than just buckling down and answering the ask, right?
Mhm.
So that is what's added complexity. I don't think that in itself has made at least us think about, oh, we shouldn't be doing business in this area, that area because of that. It's more about, all right, let's just get the requirements correct so we can actually respond. And that's the part that I think, at least in the last year, was super complex. The last 2 years, I will say.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I guess that, going back to direct sourcing, because I know, everybody likes that topic, but, especially in Illinois, right, with the law that I mentioned earlier, part of the reason why companies are stepping away from hiring temps is they don't want to reveal. I mean, this is an article I'm reading that was, written by SIA. They don't want to reveal to anybody what their pay rates are and what their benefit costs are, right? So perhaps direct sourcing may be the way to go, right? I mean, they just simply payroll, their selected workers. I mean, I like transparency too, but I can see there's some pushback here.
Yeah. Faiz, your thoughts on regulatory?
Yeah. So, I'm the law that Nick is referring to. It's interesting when he was describing it earlier on, sounds like the agency workers directive that the UK came out with many, many years ago, right? That said, if you're going to be hiring a temp, then after 12 weeks of them being on site, they need to be making equal to what their counterparts on a full-time site are. With benefits, etc. From day one, they get A, B, and C, and from week 12, they get D, E, F, and G, right? France has similar rules. There, they actually say the contractor is entitled to a 10% premium because they don't get all the benefits your full-time employee does. So the U.S. is really playing catch-up to the rest of the world in some of these areas. Is it appropriate? I think for the workers, yes. For the employers or the end client, there's a decision they need to make, right? Do we want a full-time employee on our books who we can direct and have them for as long as we need? Or do we want to stick to our guns and only bring in temps, but we'll pay them the same rate? So there's no notion of cost savings, but they still retain the ability to be flexible in their workforce, right? So there's still that as the golden carrot for them. And I know I'm mixing metaphors. And as far as the rest of the compliance element, I think those end up applying for the most part equally to perm staff and contractors. So there's less of we need to do A, B, and C. I think one of the differentiators of contracting in the U.S. versus most of the countries is, and this is a wider topic, maybe for another discussion, Ash, but it's a state of the healthcare in this country, right? The drivers make it very different for a contractor here, as they do in places like Canada or Europe or most of the world where healthcare is a given. The contractor does not have to worry about, is my health insurance covered?
Yeah.
Whereas here they do, and that is for some limiting. They'll do contract work in between while they're constantly searching for a perm job where they need the coverage. Or if they don't need the coverage, it's because they have a partner that's has them covered, or they have their own, which they're paying a premium for. Right?
See, that's an interesting point. I think that's where we should be. Like, if there's the trend that people want to be working anywhere, anytime for anyone, and they want to be a gig worker, then we should be, rather than figuring out these issues, we should be working on a solution where my healthcare is portable, so I can do that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
more pressing problem to follow attack, but I don't know.
Yeah, that it's a huge. I think it's a huge consideration for a lot of contractors, and why the
Yeah.
contractor market here is very different to other countries, and the
Definitely.
drivers behind it.
Yeah. Next topic. So is the 4-day work week going to come back? Is the Great Resignation over? And do you think we're going to eventually pull people back in the office if the economy goes down and force everyone to come back into the office?
I'll take this one. I don't think there's going to ever be a one-size-fits-all policy, right?
Yeah.
In any type of sustainability from any company perspective, I think organizations are going to continue having to flex and adapt, and those that do adapt, it may not be everybody does this. It might make sense for some folks to do 410s, and somebody who only wants to cover afternoons.
Yeah.
I think depending on the work that you're doing, and is it something that can be remote? Is it something you can flex on? That's going to have to be a company by company decision, and maybe even business unit within your companies to make that decision of what it's going to be. But I think we'll still continue to need that flexibility and adaptability.
Mhm.
I don't think there's ever going to be it's done now and we're all back in the office or we're not back in the office. It's going to vary, but that's, I think, for a long time.
True. And do you think if we don't go back to that and we keep like a 2-day work week, right, on site and then 3 days off site, should those 3 days be considered part of my ESG carbon footprint that I've reduced in the reporting?
Oh wow, that's a that's a good one, right? Perhaps you could look at it if you don't have so many people, unless you have a really solid, public transport system. If you're talking Europe or some of our APAC countries,
Yeah.
If in the U.S. and that you have folks not on the road and not consuming, then perhaps you could look at it from an ESG perspective.
Yeah. Keith, what are your thoughts?
That's super interesting to me. I think 9 to 5 Monday through Friday hasn't been a part of my life in 10 years. So it just hasn't been how I've worked long before COVID. So for me, I never see that really happening. I feel like it's going to be hybrid. I feel like now that others have gotten a taste of it and they now know how to work not in the office 9 to 5, commuting and all those things, it's going to be really hard to get people back in office. I think there's plenty of people that would love a 410 with that hybrid mix, meaning I don't need to be in the office 410, but I'm working 410 and that's fine, as long as I can do it hybrid with the hours. And then I think, again, back to my earlier point about the generational gaps in the workforce right now and all the different generations, there are just, quite frankly, generations coming in that will not work that way. So we've got to continue to think about, again, how do people want to work? How are we going to get them to be most productive? And those two have to balance.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, great point by Keisha. I mean, I think the multi-generational workforce is certainly guiding this, because I think certain generations believe that work only counts if you're sitting in the office for 8 hours a day. Never mind what their Google searches look like during the day. If you're not seen, you don't exist, right? And I saw an article maybe a year or so ago talking about Chase Bank and saying, well, they think anybody that wants to work from home is a wimp, right? Like, you just don't want to tough it out by coming into the office. I don't interview a single person in the last year and a half that hasn't said to me, do you have a hybrid work model? And what's so interesting about a hybrid work model, right, is you like to think, well, if we have a remote or a hybrid work model, then we're going to attract people from different geographies. But yet, if it's a hybrid work model, you're still required to work 5 minutes down the street. So we need to tune up what we mean by a hybrid work model as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Faiz, your
But I
thoughts?
hope it never goes anywhere.
No, I'm with what Keisha, Nick, and Jen have said. I think companies need to revisit the whole notion of workplace. There are certain roles you need to be in the office, but that's not necessarily going to be hybrid, or they'll create a hybrid situation out of the days they need to be. But if folks really don't need to be and can make it on a need basis, I think they'll go a long way. At our firm, for those who are designated as office workers, it's a hybrid situation. And then we also have an element of remote workers or designated remote workers for a variety of different reasons. And I think that model works really, really well.
Yeah.
Right, where you have both possibilities there. The firm is outright and says, if you're needed, whether you're remote or on a hybrid, if you're needed, we would like you to show up or come in. On the hybrid, the expectation is you will, because you live close to the office in one of the metro areas. If not, you're designated as remote.
Yeah.
And when you're needed, we'll ask you to come in. Right.
Yeah.
I think that is a powerful statement rather than a one size fits all that will only going to be hybrid, or even worse now, in my opinion, is it's always going to be office based, because people have built their lives or rebuilt their lives over the last 4 years. And it's not just about daycare, right?
Oh, 100%.
It's not about daycare anymore, although that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
There's other things. People have rebuilt their lives with what was given, and you can't all of a sudden take it away, because you can't take the last 3 years away or 4 years away, right?
Yeah.
That happened. We adapted. Self-checkout is here to stay, whether it's 10 items or less. It's here to stay.
Yeah, good.
Right.
I
like it.
If this ESG idea would change the perspective of some of the people who are against work from home or hybrid thing.
But I think they're preaching to the converted already. I think there's some CEOs out there who now since said, okay, fine, we'll allow it. But then there's others that have a different view. Like I said, the companies that make most of it are the ones that are allowing both options.
Yeah.
And then within those two options, they have sub options, as opposed to one or the other, or not.
Yeah. All right. So we have a few more minutes left. So I want to leave you with one thing that Keisha kept bringing up, and I think it's really interesting. So, and it's related to DEI. One, do you think DEI is going to be a force to continue over the next few years? Number two is the multi-generational workforce and how we communicate with each other is another DEI issue, I think, that hasn't really been addressed. Which Keisha's brought up wisely. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was wondering when you were going to talk about DEI, Ash. I'm just kidding.
I'll let you drop the mic on this one.
I had to Google this word because I thought it was offensive, but it's not. But I think that in the I'm going to say something really unpopular, but I don't care. But I think that diversity certifications, particularly in the staffing industry, have become bastardized. I mean, other than Allegis and the publicly traded staffing companies, my general perception is that all of the staffing companies now are certified something owned supplier. And it's almost to the point where it's meaningless. Where it's used most strategically is make your payroll supplier a diverse supplier, and then pump all of your spend through them, and then now procurement just hit their goal for the year. That's probably the wrong way. Yeah, it's probably the wrong way to go about it, but who's going to turn it down? And so it's almost meaningless to me when you say that you're a diverse supplier, because everyone is. It's just not a differentiator. The biggest name in staffing is hire talent and consciously unbiased. Other than that, I don't really see any differentiators.
No, but what about the DEI part?
Wasn't that it?
multi-generational is part. I think is part. Like, it's an interesting thing that we're not really thinking about, and I think Keisha's brought it up really well. Is that like the way I communicate is different than a millennial communicates, which is different than somebody more senior communicates, and so there's this disconnect on like what's being said and heard until you figure out how to sort of. I mean, maybe AI can help with that too, but really
that's also a multi-generational component there, Ash. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think there's going to be a move, right? Again, I kind of agree with Nick. It's not just about tracking spend. I think the responsibility will lie in ensuring that you're actually capturing a more diverse workforce, especially at a CW level, and that with the rise of more contingent labor being used, it's really crucial to extend that DE&I program to cover all of your workers, regardless of what classification, right? If you can ensure the well-being of your total workforce and understand that, then I think we'll get to a better place, but it has to be prioritized within your organization.
Yeah. I mean, I do. So what Nick's saying, I do agree with, but in the sense that you shouldn't lead with I'm a diverse supplier and that's why you should hire me. You should lead with I'm great at what I do. And on top of that, I bring this other thing to the table. But if you're leading with that, I think it's not a differentiator for sure. And if you're going to lead with that, it should be about I'm a diverse supplier brings diverse candidates to you and specialize in a niche or something like that. But yeah, you're right. It is pretty generalized at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Faiz, your thoughts on DEI?
Well, you just said it, and I think we talked about this the other day in our prep talk. The whole thing about D&I is really what are you trying to accomplish, right? Is it supplier side or is it the candidate side? And if it's on the candidate side, then will my diverse supplier actually supply me with a diverse slate of candidates, or will my non-certified supplier also be able to do that? Right. And I think that doesn't always get addressed. And the whole point of, if a supplier is going to lead off in their email or their call to me saying we're A, B, and C certified, please pay attention to me or please contact me. How do I get on your panel or your preferred supplier? That's not going to do it. It's really what can you deliver? Can you meet my needs, our firm's needs in terms of talent? And then the certification becomes an add-on bonus at the end. Like, fantastic, you're certified, even better, right?
Absolutely.
But that should not be the lead-in, because to what Nick said, which I 100% agree with, it's become so generic and generalized that it's meaningless. The meaning comes in what you're able to do, and can you supply that diverse pipeline, diverse slate of candidates? Yeah. That doesn't require certification to do. White, brown, or white, whatever. It's don't need that.
True.
I'm not happy.
Well, thank you all. This was amazing, and it was fun, and you also made it funny. So I love that. I love that too. We should definitely do this again.
Yeah,
definitely.
Pick any topic too. It'd be great.
All right.
I mean, if you can't have levity, what's the point?
Yeah. Staffing.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ash.
Thank you. Bye-bye.